My name is Danielle, and I'm a front-end web developer at the Meteor Development Group, where we make open source tools and commercial tooling for GraphQL under the brand name Apollo. So today I'm going to tell you about a really cool tool in our GraphQL toolkit called the Apollo Client Devtools, also known as Devtools for GraphQL, and how they've made my personal development experience a whole lot better as a front-end developer. So if you haven't had a chance to use GraphQL yet, it gives front-end devs a whole lot of awesome stuff that they didn't have before, such as a way to query against your data layer with a strongly typed language, a way to get exactly only the data in your payload that you ask for and not unnecessary things, a way to simplify your client logic so you don't have to do joins from different REST queries to get the data you need. But if you're going to start writing front ends with GraphQL, there's a whole lot of stuff that you also need with your data layer that you don't want to necessarily write yourself, because you have to have it for every app you build. And this stuff is things like being able to do query caching, being able to provide optimistic UI to your users before the data might exist, being able to easily handle pagination, and that's where GraphQL clients come in. The two most popular GraphQL clients out there today are Apollo Client and Apollo Client and Relay. And what they do is they allow you to write your data fetching code in this really nice abstracted way. So you can do all this awesome complicated stuff, but not actually have to worry about any of the specifics yourself. So as we were building Apollo Client, we wanted to make sure that you have a really nice, awesome, sort of abstracted GraphQL layer development experience, but also a debugging experience that's really nice as well. So we built Apollo Client on top of Redux, and if you want to start debugging something related to your app, the first step that you need to take is to look at the state of your cache and figure out what's actually there. So the benefit of using Redux as our base is that you can use the Redux DevTools and actually start debugging there. And that was our initial interaction. However, as we started building more and more clients using this method, we realized that though we had a really nice abstract way of developing and writing code, we didn't have that same experience in debugging. Because as you can see in the Redux DevTools, though you could see the state of your cache, you also see a whole bunch of other noise that's not really relevant to you when you're thinking on the layer of GraphQL. So we were really inspired to build GraphQL DevTools that gave you the same development experience as something like the React DevTools, where you can look at your components specifically and not necessarily just at what they compile to. So the first feature of our Apollo Client DevTools is the Query Watcher. And what this allows you to do is to see every query that your components are running and exactly where they appear on the page, exactly what strings they're sending to your server, exactly what variables they're passing along. And this is really convenient because when you actually look at this in your code, it's not all necessarily in one place. Your variables are usually dynamically inserted. So if you want to know exactly why one query is breaking your client, you'd have to console log the variables and extract them into something else. You can also view how your queries are pulling, and you can see in general just the page density of the data in your pages. The second feature we have is an embedded Graphical. And this is really cool because Graphical is an IDE for your GraphQL endpoint. So usually you have to stand up Graphical on a separate URL and navigate to it if you want to query against your server. And that usually takes some configuration because oftentimes your server queries need to be authenticated, so you need to do special things to configure Graphical. However, by embedding Graphical into Apollo Client DevTools, what we were enabled to do is actually piggyback on the configuration you've already created in your own app. So it just works out of the box, and you don't have to do any of that yourself. We can also piggyback on the fact that we know exactly how you're making queries against your own server, and so we can autofill things like suggested queries for you and variables we already know you're using, which saves you a whole lot of context switching and copying and pasting. It's really convenient. This is probably my favorite part of the DevTools. The last thing we have is a store inspector, and this is pretty much like the crux or the base of what you need for any cache DevTools. It pretty much does exactly what you'd expect, which is it allows you to inspect the state of your cache and search for different things. But what I really wanted to emphasize is that the super cool thing about having DevTools for your data layer is that everything is all in one place. So it used to be if you were using REST, for example, and you wanted to debug something with your endpoint, you'd have to open Postman or a similar tool and write a query and copy your context headers, and it just took a really long time to figure out what your endpoint was even giving you. And with GraphQL, Without Devtools, you have to do a similar thing. It's a whole lot easier. You open Graphical, but you still have to do a lot of copying and pasting. With this, it's all in one place. It all happens automatically, and it's already in the same place you're used to doing the rest of your debugging, which is super convenient. So you can find the Apollo Client Devtools on the Chrome Web Store. If you search for GraphQL, they'll show up. It's really convenient, and thanks for listening.